When the temperatures dropped below freezing earlier this week, water lines in several of the Pruitt Igoe apartment buildings broke and the subsequent flow of water turned into ice. Today, as temperatures warmed, the ice thawed and residents continued to battle the resultant mess. At 2311 Dixon, a sewer line is broken, and now raw sewage bubbles out of the ground like a malevolent spring. In the building itself, residents and maintenance crews are working to clean up the mess. Elmer Hammond, chairman of the Human Development Corporation Neighborhood Advisory Council, has tried for 3 days to get city and housing authority officials to help remedy the plight.
Well, I have talked with Mr. Meeker. I've talked with Boyd Wilson of Housing, asked him about this here situation for the last 2 days. And Mr. Meeker called me and said he'd talk with me.
He's in the mayor's office.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
And he said he'd called Mr. Klein, and Mr. Klein was supposed to send someone in, and no one ever showed. And the only alleviation of this problem that I have received thus far has been from HDC, from Mr. Cahill.
What sort of assistance did you get from the Human Development Corporation, Mr. Cahill?
Well, through the petty cash that I discussed with Mr. Cahill, he sent out and bought me 3 electric heaters and was sent down to 2107 Cass for us to distribute to these families that had no heat in their buildings on O'Fallon.
In addition to the water, how many families are without heat at this point?
Well, I would say right now approximately 40 or 50 people right now. And it's possibly that it will go higher than that before the day is gone.
What's the likelihood that you're going to be able to remedy this?
Well, the only thing I can do now is try to get a hold to the housing authority people and some of the city officials and see if we can get these people out of this building immediately. They cannot stay in there over the night with these children.
With the temperatures dropping as night fall, the residents here in Pruitt Igoe will probably be frozen in again. Then tomorrow, should the temperatures warm up, the water will come back. And so it'll go until somebody comes in to remedy the situation. Fred Porterfield, Big 4 News, from the Pruitt Igoe apartments. The disaster that fell on Pruitt Igoe and most of the other public housing units in St. Louis during the past several days is gradually being overcome with the aid of a massive outpouring of material, money, and manpower. Housing officials and residents began the job of correcting the major problems. 30 additional carpenters were added to the maintenance crews to board up an estimated 10,000 broken windows, which contributed to the general breakdown of services when temperatures dropped below zero last week. 5 additional plumbers joined the crews working to repair water pipes. Clothing and other household items needed to replace those that were underwater and ice in the apartments continued to flow into the community center. The center, being used as a headquarters for the massive cleanup, doubled as a meeting place this morning for the Pruitt Igoe Coordinating Council.
Now, there are a lot of other groups that want to come in and do something, but we need you to tell us what is most important and what takes priority. I would like to recommend the following. That you need, first of all, to have this area declared as a disaster area and an emergency area. That the second thing, that you work on evacuation, not trying to clean up what's here, but evacuation of the citizens who are here and who cannot make it in the condition that these homes are in today. And the third thing is to work for a permanent solution to this problem, which keeps coming up time and time and time again.
The residents were particularly high in their praise of the members of the Black Nationalist Party and the Black United Front for their help through the past several days. Some said the disaster was beneficial because it united the tenants and many dissident black groups in a common cause. After the meeting, volunteers, including white fraternity members from the University of Missouri at Rolla and led by neighborhood residents, began a door-to-door canvass to determine what else is needed. William Bud Shawalker, Director of Housing, and others who have been coordinating the effort, believe the situation is gradually returning to order.
Well, as of this morning, of course, we do have heat, we do have power, we have some of the amenities of decent living, we have additional maintenance force on hand, we have plumbers, we have carpenters, and we are in process today of correcting some of the things which have created the abominable conditions we've had in public housing in the past few days.
The question comes to mind, though, is are you going to be able to prevent this sort of thing in the future?
With the necessary funds to provide the necessary maintenance force and supplies, this will not happen in the future.
Pruitt Igoe was the most dramatic incidence of disaster. However, you do have similar cases in other public housing units here in the city, at Vaughan, at Cochran, at Darst Webby. are you going to be able to correct all of the problems?
We will, yes. I would estimate at this particular time that we are probably talking on a time schedule basis of perhaps a week to 10 days.
Outside one of the buildings in the mud, the slush, and the debris, we found this button which looks a bit the worse for wear. It says, "Make Pruitt Igoe number 1. That undoubtedly reflects the feeling of many of the residents who live here. It also undoubtedly reflects the feeling of those who live in Vaughan, who live in Cochrane, who live in Darst Webby, who suffered through broken pipelines in the sub-zero temperatures. Make Pruitt Igoe number 1. Pruitt Igoe at this point, and the other public housing units in St. Louis, are still a long way from number 1. Fred Porterfield, Big 4 News, from Pruitt Igoe.
Girls were actually getting raped. People were actually getting killed.
This was the end of Pruitt Igoe housing projects that started as a complex of 33 high-rise buildings that opened in 1955 with 2,800 families, costing taxpayers about $57 million. But the hopes of many for a better life ultimately came crashing down. I too remember a lot about Pruitt Igoe. I grew up in this now falling down house on Gamble. It's a house right across the street from what we simply called the projects. But Pruitt Igoe has long since been torn down. As you can see behind me, it's just vacant tree-covered land now. Now, after I made my post on Facebook with me as a child in front of Pruitt Igoe, a lot of people reached out with their stories of life in the projects. What was it like when you first moved in Pruitt Igoe?
Oh, it was great. You know, we were poor, you know, coming up. There was 10 children in my family, and we were glad to move in there. I mean, the apartments were really nice.
Today, Julia Gillespie is a retired factory supervisor living in a middle-class neighborhood of St. Louis County. But she vividly remembers life as a child in the projects with a family of 10 brothers and sisters. She talks about the changes just 10 years after Pruitt Igoe opened. How violent did it get?
It got bad. I mean, there was murder, there was robberies. When you heard guns out, you went in the house, you locked the doors, and you sat on the floor and watched television until it stopped because you didn't know what was going to happen.
Imogene Menzies is a retired healthcare worker. When I went to her apartment, she had a picture of her on the table showing a group of people, including me, at a Pruitt Igoe reunion. She has vivid memories of her at her family's apartment in Pruitt Igoe. After things turned bad, the lights were out in the stairwell. She had to climb to get to her apartment in the high-rise building.
It was so dark that you couldn't see a hand in front of your face. And that's when someone grabbed me between those 2 floors and put a knife to my throat and told me to be quiet. I was 12. He was attempting to rape me.
She escaped, but she said she had to run this gauntlet every day.
The second time I was crossing the 4th floor hallway. There was a utility room at the end. Someone came out of it, grabbed me by my neck, and drugged me with the hand over my mouth back into the utility room.
Once again, she escaped.
No, he had a twin.
Mary Jane Williams is a retired teacher who grew up in Pruitt Igoe. Pictures of her from her days as a child bring back memories of the good and later the bad. I talked to her and her friend Joyce Miller, who also grew up in the projects, about a horrible memory they both witnessed in 1964 when they were both 13 years old.
I heard shots, and I saw this man just laying on the building. It was a policeman.
They say that policeman who was killed turned out to be St. Louis police officer Paul McCullough, the father of St. Louis County prosecuting attorney Bob McCullough.
When you see a life leave a body, more or less, it does have an effect on you.
By the late 60s, just 600 families remained of the thousands that once lived here. Everyone I talked to said the demolitions that started in 1972 were long overdue to put a final end to the disaster that started as a dream.
I wanted something better out of life than what, I saw down there.
And I just wanted to be a product that came from Pruitt Igoe that people wouldn't, couldn't look at and say, didn't know nothing good come out of Pruitt Igoe.
So right now, the old Pruitt Igoe site is just a huge 57-acre overgrown tract of land. The Slay administration says it's looking at plans by some people who want to develop at least a part of it. I'll let you know if those plans get off the ground. After all, you paid for it.